Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ben Ross.
Hello everyone, thanks so much for coming to this event, UK Markets, What to Expect in 2020. We have some fantastic panellists, travel leaders, all of them, joining us for this discussion, which I think, well I hope, will give us real insight into what's happened over the last year, as well as peering into the crystal ball of the future. Joining us today will be Julia Low-Bouy-Said, Chief Executive Officer at Advantage Travel Partnership, Joe Jamoska, Vice President and Managing Director UK and Ireland and Asia at Celebrity Cruises, Neil Slavin, UK Country Director at EasyJet, and Patricia Yates, Director of Strategy and Communications for Visit Britain and Visit England. There will also be, as there was last year, a fascinating presentation by Caroline Bremner, Head of Travel at leading research company Euromonitor. From the point of view of travel media, it's been a peculiar year, one where we seem to have been holding our breath and waiting for something to happen or not happen for a very long time. As someone who edits a consumer travel section, it's been surprising but heartening to see the enthusiasm and interest that our readers and online users have for travel remains undimmed. We've produced more of those old-fashioned print pages in our travel section than any previous year in history. And engagement with our online content is unsurpassed. And consumer confidence during 2019, at least among our reader demographics, still seems to be just about holding up, despite some momentous change, including, of course, the collapse of Thomas Cook in September. There has, however, been a change in the preoccupations of travellers. Our e-post bag now regularly addresses such concerns as climate change, sustainability, and corporate social responsibility. There's a sense that people are seeking out real engagement with travel destinations. No longer is the ultimate goal necessarily simply to lie on a beach and soak up much needed vitamin D. People want to be changed by travel, to feel positive about their journey. The greatest peculiarity of the year has, of course, been Brexit. I remember calling it the elephant in the room this time last year, when at least we all felt we might be on course for imminent clarity on the biggest single issue facing Britain, its travellers, its businesses, and its future. Even this year, when we were putting together this panel, we all thought it was possible we'd be addressing how the travel industry would cope with life outside the EU following departure on the 31st of October. Instead, Britain faces a general election and the travel industry faces more uncertainty. That crystal ball seems cloudier than ever. The elephant in the room has, if anything, got bigger. And that's why, from my point of view, I intend to pick the brains of our panel so that we can get ahead of the game and my readers' game for next year. I'm going to be asking our panel to outline the key factors that have affected their travel sectors in 2019 and how the year has traded. They will then discuss the outcomes expected for 2020, and key issues could well include consumer confidence in the UK and across the world, which types of holiday and which destinations are doing well or worse, currency values, and which destinations will benefit from that or not. And yes, we may talk about Brexit and the effect Brexit is having and will have on markets. We will be asking for questions you have at the end of our discussion. So immediately start thinking of these, please, so we don't have those awkward pauses where I have to tell jokes about gynecologists. We are also using an audience interaction tool today called Slido. To use it, simply visit slido.com and enter the code WTM19, select Global Stage, and then send us your question. For peace of mind, the questions will be moderated from WTM's side to avoid questions such as what is the Wi-Fi code, where are the nearest toilets, and what time does the bar open, none of which I know the answers to. And finally, if everything just breaks and explodes, feel free to put your hand up, and there are mics roving around, and we can get your news from there. And now, to set the scene, I'd like to welcome onto the stage Caroline Bremner, Head of Travel at leading market research company Euromonitor International, a world-leading market research company with over 40 years of experience. Caroline manages the global content strategy for the travel and tourism sector at Euromonitor, and she's going to tell us how they predict things are going to go in 2020. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you, Ben. So it's great to be here with you at World Travel Market, and this is my 14th year, and it's great to be with such an esteemed panel today. So I'm just For those of you who aren't familiar with Euromonitor, we are a global market research company, and we have 15 offices around the world, and research travel in 100 countries, specifically regarding travel products such as lodging or short-term rentals and airlines. But in terms of tourism flows, we research over 210 markets. So we have a very thorough view of what's going on in the global travel industry. Today we'll take a look at the global overview, what's happening worldwide. Then we'll focus a little bit on those destinations that are performing well compared to those that are not doing so well. We'll then shift focus and look at the UK specifically in terms of consumer and business confidence, followed by that big elephant in the room, Brexit. So globally, on the left there, you have the global arrivals for 2030, which are expected to reach 2.3 billion. Now, today, there's about 1.4 billion arrivals per year. So the global industry is growing by about 3 to 4% every single year. So that is far outperforming the global economy. By 2030, we may expect to see 2.6 trillion receipts. But I think, as Ben mentioned, we're very much moving towards a more sustainable business model in the travel industry. So I thought it would be nice to show what the average spend per trip has done over the past few decades. And you can see that there has been great pricing pressure, and the average spend per trip has actually fallen over the past few decades. That is due to the likes of online travel agents. You've got the fact that we've had the rise of the low-cost carriers. We've got EasyJet here today. But what's quite positive is when we look towards the forecast outlook, that it begins to start trending upwards. And if there are destinations in the room, we know that you are focusing very much on targeting value-driven demand rather than volume-driven as we move towards that sustainable model. Looking at the leading destinations worldwide, it's a game of two countries. It's the US and China. So in terms of destinations there on the left, you can see that what the projection is from this year to 2030, and it's still going to be dominated by the US and China. This is very much in terms of receipts spent in those markets. But interestingly, the UK is still holding its own. It's ranked 9th in terms of global receipts by 2030. And then on the outbound side, we perform very well. We're ranked 4th, so that's on the right there. But what's really fantastic about this trend is just the sheer strength of growth coming out of China. We all know that China outbound is a major focus for destinations and travel brands around the world, driving intra-regional travel in Asia, but equally, we know that there are millions of Chinese visiting Europe, and for example, we've seen growth of over 20% of Chinese inbound to the UK. So it really is a story of strong performance in terms of receipts, which is good news. So those winners are China, Southeast Asia. I thought it was very interesting that we have Turkey, which is expected to see a strong incremental growth over the next 5 years. We know that they had the terror attacks of 2016-17, and now that they have recovered. Obviously, there's some military action towards the border with Syria, but it shows that equally we see countries such as Egypt, Tunisia, Turkey, all sort of coming back, and that's necessarily going to be a problem for some of our Mediterranean friends, such as, for example, Greece or Croatia. On the right there, we have the countries, the destinations that are expected to see the lowest growth over the next 5 years. And it is the smaller markets. It's, small nations in the Pacific, which may be exposed to higher price of, for example, airline flights, the weakening economy in Australia, New Zealand, because at the moment we're very much facing a global slowdown. So all markets around the world are beginning to be slightly constrained. So what else is going on in terms of the global travel industry? This is a major trend that we've seen impacting particularly Europe. 59% of all consumers say they're worried about climate change. In Scandinavia, we have flight shaming, which has taken off, Sweden leading the charge. And what's very interesting is that, you have very high-profile celebrities or climate activists who, in terms of Greta Thunberg, that are really mobilizing the youth of today to say, look, we can't continue to travel the way that we have. We have to start being sustainable and responsible. And so what we're seeing, and we'll be talking a bit about this tomorrow when we launch the Megatrends report, is some of the new digital tools, carbon calculators, that are coming in and really helping consumers to make a more responsible and sustainable choice. So what does this all mean for the UK? Well, this is looking at consumer and business confidence. And over the past year, if you start from 2018, it's begun to trend downwards. And there has, as Ben rightly said, there's been so much uncertainty. First of all, we had the Brexit vote in 2016. You saw that sharp drop. Then we've had the various extensions. We're now at our third extension. Each time there's a deadline, there's more uncertainty, because will they, won't they, and what's going to happen. So we're in our third extension. It's called a flex extension, and that's till officially the end of January. So at the moment, consumers and businesses are feeling that hit of uncertainty. We know, for example, in the travel industry, we've just had the collapse of Thomas Cook, not necessarily fully related to what's happened with Brexit, but obviously a contributing factor. In the last quarter as well, we saw that the UK economy contracted by 0.2%. We'll have to wait until my son's birthday on the 11th of November to find out if we're in technical recession. So we're still in a bit of limbo at the moment. On the bright side, the labour market remains buoyant. We have unemployment at a very low level of 3.8%, and wages continue to outperform inflation. So there are some bright signs. For Brexit, Euromonitor, we have developed a travel forecast model, and we have various different scenarios depending on your view of Brexit. So if you're feeling optimistic, there will be, for example, a light or a no Brexit. But our official baseline is based on the delayed free trade agreement that we expect the UK to reach with the EU at a delayed date, so that could be well into the transition period, which starts next year. Equally, there's been a lot of talk about a no-deal Brexit, and so we've developed two different scenarios for this one. One, no deal, we leave, everything reverts back to World Trade Organization rules. That would impact by GDP by about 5% compared to the baseline, or a disorderly no deal, where that would actually impact GDP from anything from 5 to 10%. So that was very extreme, almost a bit like the Bank of England we're predicting. But at the moment, we're seeing that there has been this trending down in terms of the economy. As I said, we need to wait until middle of November, next week really, to find out if we're in recession or not. So what does this all mean? We're talking a lot about the economy and consumer confidence, but what does this mean in terms of arrivals? And we're delighted to have Visit Britain with us here today. But this is the view that from Euromonitor, we've been keeping an eye on the IPS, the ONS. And so last year we saw a dip of 5%. Year to date to July, it is now about minus 1%. But at Euromonitor, we believe if there is this free trade agreement, that certainty is provided, then we could see an uplift of 3% next year, trending upwards to 42 million by 2024. If there were to be a no-deal Brexit, that would actually have a further positive effect, because the pound would depreciate against the dollar and the euro, and that would make us even more affordable. And we saw that the exchange rate effect right at the beginning of the Brexit process, but it kind of ran out of steam over the last year or so. If there's a light or no-deal Brexit, then it's basically pretty much status quo, and the pound would rally. So that's why we're predicting less of a positive impact. And if that disorderly no deal, which we really hope is off the table, again, the pound would fall further than 10%. So those, obviously, more than happy to discuss the scenarios, the assumptions, how the model works during the panel or after this discussion. So Europe continues to be the key source market for the UK. Whatever happens with Brexit, we are so dependent on our European source markets. But what's very interesting is the potential that we can see from Asia. We're in the Asian century, but Asia in terms of inbound to the UK still remains very negligible, and there's so much potential. The fact that we have 500,000 Chinese, when really, if we wanted to be competing with the likes of France, we should be aiming for at least 5 million Chinese. So there is opportunity. And then those sort of key inbound source markets over the next 5 years where we see the strongest growth will continue to be from Europe, including the US, particularly because they have their strong dollar at the moment. And the only negative I could find was Venezuela, but Venezuela is really, off the chart in terms of its economic crisis. So it didn't look too bad. Then for the outbound, obviously we have a lot of tour operators and travel agents in the room. Now, dependent on UK outbound, what we're seeing, the outbound market is double the inbound, but what we're seeing, it's much more dependent on the performance of the UK economy. We've seen a decline of 1% to 2% over the last year, which may continue this year, but we predict that with no-deal Brexit, there would be a slowdown and then it would recover. But the best outcome would be that delayed free trade agreement with the certainty, with the UK economy back on track. And we really do not wish for a disorderly no deal where we crash out with no trade agreement in place. There's a massive shock to the economy. That would definitely write off about 10 million outbound departures, and we would go back to very much the way the tourism economy was in the days of the economic crash of 2008. In terms of winners for the outbound side, we have our usual suspects of Spain, France, Ireland, and then Greece. I feel that Greece is showing a little bit of a decline here, just because of what's happening, as I mentioned, with the recovery in Turkey, Egypt, and Tunisia. So Greece may be one of those destinations that sees a little bit of a decline over the next 5 years. So that was a quick run through. Absolutely delighted to be here with such an esteemed panel and look forward to discussing further with Ben and yourselves.
Caroline, it was fascinating. I just got a couple of questions for you. You did mention that a no-deal Brexit is likely to increase inbound travel and receipts. But surely if we rely so heavily on Western Europe, that will be a contradictory pressure that people are less likely to travel to us.
Well, I think what people are looking for is certainty, and I think that's what's been off-putting over the past 2 years, that there has been uncertainty about, the role of Europe, the UK in Europe, how we relate to our source markets. So we do feel that what's happening, where you see that positive uplift from the no deal, it's very much driven by the currency effect. So if the pound were to drop, say, by another 10%, then that makes us very sort of attractive to European source markets. Also, we're predicting that our source markets will continue to grow their own economies. So GDP and high-income households is also a driver behind those figures. Trade intensity would be negative, but then there's other compensating factors.
Brilliant. Caroline, thank Caroline again for me. That would be lovely. And do come and take a seat. I'm going to introduce the rest of our panel now. I'm going to do them all in one go, so save your applause till the end. Firstly, Julia Low-Boué-Said, Chief Executive Officer of Advantage. Julia became Chief Executive Officer in April 2018, having originally been appointed Managing Director of the Advantage Travel Centres Group in July 2013. Advantage has a sales turnover of approximately £4.5 billion and a business model which incorporates membership of travel agents and travel management companies, an insurance company and an insurance broker. Joe Jamoska, Vice President and Managing Director UK and Ireland and Asia from Celebrity Cruises. Joe joined Celebrity Cruises' parent company Royal Caribbean Cruises in January 2005, and in January 2014 Joe took the helm as the first Managing Director for Celebrity Cruises UK and Ireland. She is also a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion and has been recognised for this work in 2016 with inclusion in the top 100 list of LGBT people in business. Neil Slavin is EasyJet's UK Country Director and was appointed to the role in March 2019. He oversees the strategic direction and commercial performance of EasyJet in the UK, which incorporates over 160 aircraft, 18 airports and 11 bases. He's been with EasyJet since 2011 in a variety of roles. Patricia Yates has been with Visit Britain and Visit England since 2005, becoming Strategy Communications Director in 2007. She is responsible for research, tourism affairs and communications. She also launched and edited The Witch Guide to Hotels for many years. She's chair of TIER, the Tourism Industry Emergency Response Group, which coordinates the tourism industry messaging at times of crisis, and is a fellow of the Tourism Society. Please welcome our panel onto stage. Brilliant. Thank you. Did we all agree with everything that Caroline said? Patricia?
Why come to me first? I don't. Much of it. I think we would be a little more positive about America. America's more difficult to call next year because it's got an election, so some political uncertainty there, and some of the financial stuff you might worry about. They're about to go into a recession, but we think for next year there'll be still solid growth there. We're a little less positive than Euromonitor about Eastern Europe, and I think on the no-deal Brexit, I mean we've looked at the numbers, but we've also been doing sentiment research since the referendum, and looking at that, I would say that the currency depreciation has already been fed in by people, and they're sort of over that. And I don't believe that a dipping currency will drive that Europe market. And the things like uncertainty about can you use your ID card, can you use your passport, and the will I be welcome, the two strands we're seeing coming out of Europe that are affecting travel is will I be welcome when I get there, and what are the practicalities going to be, and those are going to be much more uncertain than a no-deal Brexit, and so we would be more negative about no-deal Brexit. We don't see it as a bounce up.
Yes, I think there are hard to see many good sides to that. Any other views from Caroline's?
We're interesting as an industry, a bit the reverse. If Caroline were true, then from your point of view, we're getting lots of inbound visitors to the UK from a business that is very much outbound, albeit that the industry has a lot of cruises from the UK as well. From our point of view, obviously, an orderly Brexit is preferable. And with the pound getting stronger as well to the dollar. So whilst it's good from a cost point of view of resources and investment here, from a point of view all of our revenue is in dollars. So therefore, despite the fact that people are definitely paying more and more people are cruising, for a lot of organisations such as mine that reports in dollars, you get beaten up for an FX rate that you really are not in charge of. So from our point of view, definitely we would want to see more of an orderly Brexit. And it's the uncertainty.
We've had a question actually from the floor. When Caroline talks about no-deal Brexit and disorderly no-deal Brexit, what do you mean about the difference between the two?
It's the level of the disorder. So the disorderly one is where we leave the WTO, we revert back to WTO conditions, and our GDP assumption is that it will be down by -5. If it's disorderly, it's a complete catastrophe, and yes, then it would be down by -10.
Right.
So that's a huge economic shock. That there really is, if the whole thing is completely mismanaged, rather than the preparations which the government has been trying to put in place.
Fine. Right, let's park Brexit for a bit. I'm sure we'll get that back there in the end. I'm going to ask you all a little bit about how things have gone in 2019 before we get onto the sort of future-gazing stuff. Julia, let's start with you. It feels as though the travel agency sector in general has always got to adapt and move and change more than most other sectors in travel. Has that been the case in 2019?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting year. It's been a year where you can probably split it into different quarters. So I think we started off the year, with Brexit looming. If you remember, I think 31st of March was our first deadline date, so that was looming. But we got through a pretty strong peak as the date got nearer. There, it actually was very slow. We saw certainly saw a downturn. The date got shifted, and we've seen a bounce back. So I think in the travel agency community, we're pretty resilient. We're pretty optimistic, fraternity, if you like. And actually, what they do is they can swap and change what they sell. So a lot of our agents are, they're selling cruises, they're selling long haul, they're selling flight only, they're selling UK. So they can diversify where the market needs them to diversify, and they're not big tankers that they have to move. So we are pretty resilient as an industry, and can go where the market moves. But the summer's been pretty buoyant. The summer was pretty good. I think from a consumer point of view, prices have been quite low. So the consumers win. As a business, you don't, but as a consumer, you do. So it's been pretty resilient. And obviously, the end of the summer saw unfortunate tragic demise of Thomas Cook. And coming out at the other side has meant that our travel agents have a empty space on the high street. Maybe not for long. Obviously, we've got Hayes Travel, which is actually a great boost for the independent high street and shows confidence in the market. So from our point of view, it's been a pretty good year. Our agents are not naive, and we're not naive of the challenges that it faces, but it's been overall, the year's been quite healthy. And sales looking ahead for next summer, sales are pretty positive.
You mentioned Thomas Cook, and obviously that's been a huge change for the marketplace. Did you see that as emblematic of it not functioning in the market, or of bad management, or anything that you're going to take anything in terms of your membership after that?
Yeah, I'm not close enough to Thomas Cook to know the reasons, but I think from everything I've read and seen, I think it's probably a combination of everything that you've just described.
Neil, how has EasyJet fared? Seems to be quite a calm year for EasyJet.
Yeah, so I would share Julia's sort of optimistic view. I think when we look back at 2019, we saw the beginnings of some capacity rationality into the air traffic market. So whilst the total number of seats on sale between the UK and Europe and around the Med into North Africa has increased, it only increased by around 2 or 3%, which against that backdrop of UK economic growth of around 1.4% across the year, that's a level of demand-supply ratio that can support consistent yields from one year to another. So we thought it was a relatively stable year. We saw some destinations have a particularly good year, so of course we also saw an increase in demand for Turkey, for example. So Turkey had a very good
swing back to Eastern Europe.
Exactly that. So Turkey had a very strong year. I would never rule out the Western Med though, because the Western Med is where the volumes are, at least for us. So Spain, Portugal in particular, Spain continued to grow, although in relative terms by a much smaller percentage than Turkey. In absolute terms, by exactly the same number of trips. I would expect to see some of those trends continue into 2020. Of course, you can't look back at 2019 without mentioning Thomas Cook. I think that's an indication of a market which is consolidating and increasingly consolidating. We saw that in 2018 with other carriers. We see it continuing into 2019. It is really undesirable for lots of reasons, but it is a sort of market correction in the face of oversupply and the backdrop of a weak demand environment. So as we go into 2020 now, the fact that I wouldn't expect a significant increase in the amount of supply in the market is probably appropriate given the economic conditions.
Joe, speaking most generally about the cruise industry in itself, which I know you speak for Clear as well.
Yeah.
How has 2019 fared? I mean, there's been a lot of ship launches. There's been good news that I've certainly been seeing in our pages.
Yeah, I think overall the cruise industry is performing well, considering everything that's been going on throughout the world. I mean, obviously there was a big hit with the Hurricane Dorian recently, but as an industry, the whole industry came together and did an awful lot to make sure that we really have helped everybody on the islands and infrastructure, and also making sure that we get water and substance to everybody on the islands. As an industry, we're very good at coming together in that way. We're going to have about 28 million people cruising this year. Next year's looking at about 30 million. We've got 20 new ship launches as an industry, and 100 new ships in order between now and 2027 to the tune of about $70 billion. So I think that shows the confidence in the industry overall. I think it's a sector of the industry that works better together than any other sector, obviously from a non-commercial point of view, but in really telling the story of getting more people to cruise. We're still a tiny percentage of the overall holiday industry, in single digits, so 5% of the overseas holiday market from the UK, 12% of the package holiday market. So there's still a significant opportunity for us, and from a UK point of view, despite the Thomas Cook and despite the hurricanes that we were all hit with this year, the business is holding up well.
Patricia, did we have a good summer? Is it all about weather?
Inbound, we've had a good year so far. I think the story of the year has been the strength of America. If you think America is £3.3 billion worth of value to us, and we've seen growth of about 14% from American visitors over the start of the year. China also very strong, GCC, India just roaring away. So those high value long haul markets have been doing really well. Overall, we're about 1% up on numbers, 3% up on value. So overall, the year is looking good, and looking forward, we're seeing flight bookings up about 6%, which masks huge increase from China, strong still from America. So it's looking all right. I think people I talk to, if you're reliant on the American market, you've had a really great year. And lots of people are reliant on the American market.
On that basis, are you suggesting that Europe has been slightly sluggish from our point of view?
Europe has been steady, but not showing that level of growth, no. And if you look forward, I mean, I think a lot of people have concerns in particular about the German market. German market tends to book earlier, they tend to book around now, they don't like uncertainty, and so some of the Brexit messaging hasn't been helpful to that market. So we are working with the trade and with government to really get that reassurance out in the German market.
Is that an emotional thing as well? I mean, if I were a German wanting to come to Britain, do you think my sense that I would be getting a warm welcome has changed?
Yes, I think it has in Germany and in the Netherlands as well. When we've gone out and tested marketing in those markets, and the obvious thing to go for is we're great value at the moment, completely wasn't the message that resonated with people. They wanted about the walk to the welcome. They would still be welcome here. We were still friends. It was very much that warmth emotion that people wanted to come through for the advertising. Domestic market also been strong this year. I think the challenge on the domestic market is always value. So when people stay at home, they tend to be because they can budget more carefully. And at times of uncertainty, that means people book later. So much more difficult for the industry to deal with. And of course, part of the domestic industry, a huge part of the domestic industry, is day visits. And when the weather's good, it's very easy to go out, go to the beach, not spend much money at all. So that constant drive, not just to get visitors and talk about visitor numbers, but really to be getting value.
Right. I think that's a good overview of where we stand at the moment. Looking forward a little bit now, 2020 is going to be upon us before we all know it. Julia, do you get a sense that people are changing their travel habits, that they want to go to different places because they're being driven by things other than the Telegraph travel section in terms of what they choose?
No, I think Telegraph travel section does it. I think that's it. I think there are changing dynamics. I think there are changes in how, if you take generational change. I think if you take I hate saying the millennials because it's so overused now, the word, but even from Gen Zs to millennials all the way through that age group, I think there's a whole generation growing that is going to want and need something very different. They are after experiences. They're taking risks. You know, they're not planning like we used to plan. So I think there's a whole market that we're not quite catering for, and I don't think the industry is moving quick enough to cater. I think cruising has. So cruising actually, is a really multi-generational experience. But I look at, holidays to some of our, the States. You could argue is slightly as well. But I look at some of our traditional destinations. The Western Med. Actually, does Spain cater for multi-generational families? Probably not. Does every hotel offer Wi-Fi? Probably not. So all the things that are expected from travelling in, travelling with different, generational groups isn't really truly being catered for. So I think as an industry, we need to see that change, and we need to be working with, our hotel partners. We need to be working with different destinations to understand what change is required, because we'll lose people otherwise along the way.
You mentioned millennials. I mean, one of the things you do see about millennials, you mentioned experiences as well. They have travelled quite a lot more than I had at their age.
Absolutely.
Presumably part of this mix is just making sure that there is enough environment out there that they can be excited.
Yeah, and it's knowledge. So, so nowadays it's not unusual for, a customer to walk in and say, this is what I want to do, where can I go and do it? It used to be, the selling method used to be, I want to go to the Caribbean, I want to go here because I want to do scuba diving, but actually now it's the experience that's driving the sale. So we all have to become more educated and be able to work with our partners to understand what are those experiences that we can that can determine where that holidaymaker wants to go.
And Neil, you'll be taking these holidaymakers away. I heard Ryanair's results today, a rival of yours, saying that although the number of journeys that were up, the yield per customer was down 5%. Presumably that is going to be the sort of tailwind that you have to deal with as well going forward, that you're going to be making less money out of the people that are travelling with you?
Yeah, so look, I think the economic conditions are challenging. I think there is a lot of competition in the market. When I look ahead to 2020, and I mentioned market consolidation previously, I expect that the level of supply from Ryanair and others, and in the results Ryanair said they were actually going to come right down in terms of their growth profile to 3%. So that by their historical rate is a very low rate of growth. I think if the market continues to act rationally, and there are some signs that it will buck its historical trend and be able to do so, we should see airlines be able to hold their yields steady. That assumes a relatively orderly Brexit. You look across the UK market and what has happened in this sort of shakeout following Thomas Cook, I think it's likely at airports in places like Manchester, across London, you will see capacity at the same level as we've seen historically. I think at some of the regional airports around the UK, you might see less supply in the market, which is going to push up yields because there will be less competition, to put it bluntly. I think when we look ahead to 2020, one of the big themes that I expect in the market, and I guess we probably all expect, is just increasing discussion around sustainability. We really saw that build and build and build throughout 2019. We saw it with a view across Europe, originally in Scandinavia and other parts of Europe, and then relatively recently, really a lot of volume in the UK. I would expect that to continue to build in 2020, and it will be a focal point of all actors in the industry as we move into 2020 to have clear, coherent strategies in place, because that generation of millennials, or whatever we're going to call them, as well as everybody else, requires their travel companies to have a clear approach to sustainability.
Isn't that quite a hard approach to say? If we're going to talk about sustainability, flying and also cruise travel are not places that you can easily say there is a way of being green on a voyage or on a plane. Yeah. How do you deliver that sort of response? Joe, you tell me how to be it.
Well, I mean, it's a major investment from us as an industry, again, sustainability, and actually we've been at the forefront for years. So our Save the Waves programme started in 1997, long time before sustainability was even interesting on the agenda. And from that programme, we invest an awful lot in everything from technology, how we make the ships more fuel efficient. So the ships that we're building today are 20-25% more fuel efficient than the last class of ships that we built only 2 or 3 years ago. So there's constant massive investment in that. Significant investment in the whole emissions, reducing our emissions. And like everything, if you measure it, then if you target it, then you hopefully achieve it. And we set ourselves a significant emissions reduction target of 35% to our 2005 base plan to achieve that by 2020. And we actually achieved 37% by 2018. So I think, as an industry, there is, yes, at the end of the day, we were talking earlier to the lady in the front, if you're really Greta, who's doing an awful lot to raise the profile, but we live in a world where we actually want to make sure that people do travel, that people do get educated through learning from one another, and it's our responsibility as an industry for all of us to make sure that we've all got destination stewardship. So we make sure that in everything that we're doing and all the destinations that we're visiting, as we work together as an industry, how can we make our footprint, leave it better than when we got there? And I'm not saying it's easy, and it's an awful lot of investment that as an industry or as a brand or as a business we actually haven't had to do, but we've been doing it for a long time and will continue to stay at the forefront. So I'm actually very proud of what the industry does overall, and particularly what Royal Caribbean does as an organisation. I would open everybody to read our Sea Sustainability report on our RCL Investor website, because there's significant work that we're doing.
Do you ever see the possibility that you might be suggesting people do fewer cruises but for longer in order to gain some traction there?
What we do is we constantly look at our itineraries and how can we reduce fuel consumption from the itineraries that we do. That's a core focus that we have. The way in which the ships are designed, so the new parabolic bows that cut through the sea at a far more, resulting in less fuel needed to actually cut through the waters. So, 70% of the world is the ocean, and it's our business. So no, I don't think we would get to a stage where we're saying take fewer cruises. I think it's very much about what can we do, continue to make sure that we educate on board. So as Julia said, we have lots of multi-gen. We invite everybody to go down to the engine rooms to meet with our environmental team on board, to understand what we do with advanced water purification, the black water, the grey water, the white water, which I won't bore you all with, but suffice to say you could drink the black water. You could drink it at the end of the cruise if you want to. Captains have done it on an Evian bottle. So I feel very passionate that the industry is doing an awful lot and has been for years and is constantly investing in that area.
Neil?
Yes, so I think it's really important when we talk about aviation and airlines that the consumer and all actors in the industry are clear that not all airlines are equal. And of course the customer has a choice, but if they choose to fly, our message is that they should choose to fly with EasyJet, because the way that we fly, the young fleet that we have, our high load factors mean that actually our carbon emissions, our environmental impact is much less than many other carriers. So our position is very clear that if you are environmentally conscious, if you do want to fly, then EasyJet offers you a much better option than many other airlines.
Getting back to 2020, Patricia, do you think the British government is doing enough to make sure that inbound tourism is a priority at the moment?
Well, there has been, I think, a real step change in the attitude of the government over the past year. We have secured a tourism sector deal. So this is part of the government's industrial strategy when the government challenged industry to pitch to work with government, and they would choose the industries of the future that government would back. And I have to say, when that challenge was thrown down, tourism was absolutely not one they wanted to work on. And they told us, if you get 10 tourism people in the room, you've got 12 points of view. And what we want is 4 clear asks of government that we can work on together. And I thought it was really important that tourism stepped up, showed it could work together and showed it could speak with one voice. And that all those different sectors that are part of tourism came in and worked together on the deal. And we did it. And tourism came came up with the ASks, which are around skills and recruitment. So it's about people. It's about data and understanding customers and really building that knowledge chain from SMEs up to large companies. About tourism and place. How can we really look at hot housing destinations around Britain and really showing what you can do if you focus on tourism. And I've forgotten the fourth one, which is always the way, isn't it? I'll come back to the fourth one. We are one of only 10 industries that government has given a sector deal to. Of course, the government might be changing, but all the other parties have said that they are committed to that. And the reason why it's so important in tourism is that tourism is not an industry that's factored into government policy making. Because it's so small, so fragmented, so many people speaking for it, government has found it very difficult to engage with the tourism industry. And this gives us a locus and a becoming accustomed to work together. And I think sustainability will be one of our challenges in 2020. So what is the industry doing and how can we share a narrative so that tourism doesn't become the bad player in the room and that people are not being told that they shouldn't be flying and they shouldn't be travelling, because there are huge benefits from that. It is about balancing the economic and minimising the environmental impact. So I think there's another piece of work to do on that. And I remember what the other thing was on tourism. Number four is about how do you spread the load? So how do you deal with success, which plays into the sustainability agenda, because it is about building a year-round tourism industry. It is about going for value rather than volume. So all those things come together, and we've already said that one of our priorities for next year is to coordinate the industry narrative on sustainability and repeat the success we hope that we had with the sector deal, because I think any government coming in is going to have sustainability as one of their key planks, and we as an industry need to be ready to deal with whatever comes in.
Julia, how do travel agents and travel management companies, how do they deal with that sort of question being asked in bricks and mortar shops or just in general?
Well, it was interesting. I was going to touch on when Neil and Joe spoke before. So it's back to knowledge, and one of the areas that we need is the information to help us make those decisions and inform our customers. So you're at World Travel Market today, and you've got every destination, every hotel groups here. What a perfect opportunity to help them educate us. So we know how we can find out about the airline we're travelling with. We can find out about the cruise ship we're on. Actually, how do I know about the hotel? How do I know what their policy is? It's very difficult. So, and I think nowadays we feel there are certain things that makes us feel uncomfortable. I went on my summer holiday to a hotel, won't say which one, and I have to I'm using plastic cups for by the pool for drinks, and actually they're giving out plastic bottles, and it makes me feel really uncomfortable. I don't want to see that. I actually do not want to see that when I'm on holiday. So how can I be informed of that, and actually how can we help local communities understand how they can change behaviour to help us then educate consumers at this end as well?
Is that where you see the key role as you progress? There was a time when we all thought every holiday was going to be booked online, no one was going to have any interrelation with anyone else.
That's never going to happen.
And it's not going to happen because of that complexity.
Absolutely. I think for lots of different reasons, and booking, if you're booking a point to point, it's very straightforward, and I'm not a dinosaur to not expect online absolutely 100% serves a purpose, and in-house technology for travel agents is really important. So we provide our agents with technology to improve how they sell. So that is all absolutely key to enabling a travel agent of today to move forward.
The high touch idea.
High touch, absolutely. But actually, there is that human interaction. You miss talking to people. You miss having that conversation. It's really important. And if you're particularly in the leisure space, when you're on your holiday, you're at your most vulnerable. vulnerable. You have your loved ones with you. Business travel is very different. You know, in leisure, you have your family with you. You don't want anything to go wrong. You want to be able to speak to people. Yes, there's a certain amount I can transact online, but I want to know if something goes wrong, I can pick the phone up. Or actually, I need a bit more information. So it's a multi-channeled approach that, you know, the travel agent of today requires, and we've seen travel agencies grow. We've seen, you know, our marketplace is growing. There are more travel agents opening up, brand new entrepreneurs on the high street than ever before, and it's fantastic. But it's a blended solution that you need. You need the technology, absolutely, but there is that personal interaction that is required as well.
Neil, EasyJet is not immune to the idea of a holiday being a lovely thing, is it? You've spent quite a lot of time trying to make EasyJet holidays work and thrive. Is that something you see progressing next year, or are you at the level that you want to be with that?
No, very much something we see progressing. Look, we're very excited about EasyJet Holidays. The EasyJet Holidays product is something that we've had for a number of years now, but last year we said that we were going to make a renewed investment in EasyJet Holidays. We were going to change the nature of that. We were going to set up effectively a separate part of the business to develop and deliver an EasyJet Holidays product, and we've brought in a CEO, a separate CEO and a separate board, and a very strong team from around the industry to deliver that. We will be in a position to say more about that by the end of the year, but it's very much, when you think of EasyJet's kind of key strategic priorities right now, EasyJet Holidays is right on the top of that list.
Right. I know. Are you likely to expand the portfolio in terms of the destinations that people are travelling to?
Look, it's a great question. What we did say when we started to talk to the market and our stakeholders about EasyJet Holidays was that we would be leveraging EasyJet's existing network. So the opportunity that we have with EasyJet Holidays is we have got a network which already offers 100 million seats around Europe, that flies to over 130 destinations and operates in 32 countries. So you've got almost an unrivaled network that we can call upon. We don't feel that there is a requirement in the first iteration to be adding significant new destinations to that. Really, it's about using that backdrop of our existing network and to some extent our existing customer base, and introducing the holidays product to bring those things together.
Joe, how are Celebrity going to be supporting the UK market next year?
How?
Yeah.
As it continues to do, both from the trade community is significant for us. So our three areas of key investment are technology, people and destination. Technology from a point of view of making it as easy as possible, particularly for people when they're on board. The day of the digital detox, from our point of view, especially from multi-gen families, is completely gone. So the families with the kids want to do what they're doing. Historically, it's been quite expensive to get good Wi-Fi connection on board the older ships. So the significant investment that's really gone into technology, our app, both the Royal Caribbean app and the Celebrity app, to make it as easy as possible for people to really, before they get on board and also once they're on board, to maximise their holiday planning, basically. The people side, from a resource point of view, we have over 126 different nationalities on board our ships, working together from around the world. We're building ships at a significant rate, and therefore the quality of our staff is critical to the guest experience. And the people side as well, and working with our trade partners and the support that we give to the trade, because at the end of the day, as Julia said, the majority of our business is sold through the trade because people want independent advice, and because a lot of people are doing it for the first time, and therefore they want that objectivity and that advice. And the more that we help train and invest in the trade, then the better it is for us.
How do you get that messaging across for people who have never... It's the same problem that often hit the ski industry, isn't it? That people see there's a sort of barrier to entry, they've never done it, they don't quite understand. How are you sort of driving that narrative forward for people who have never been on a luxury cruise?
For the trade or for consumers, or both?
Consumers, just the messaging.
Well, I mean, the best thing is to get people on board for a taster. That's the best thing. So we have the great opportunity of, all the destinations around the world. I mean, all the winners we go to, which is great. So wherever the ships are in the world, we make sure that we invite people on board to experience it, both trade and consumers. That's the best way to do it. Seeing is believing is number one. The second thing is online. So digital, the ability to actually showcase the brands and the products both online on the website and through our travel agent training program. So that's the second best way. And we have a significant website, obviously, that enables us to do virtual reality, augmented reality, and therefore to get a real experience of what you would get on board. And then the third thing is experiential. So partnerships, experiential. We do a lot of partnerships like sponsoring Taste of London. Cuisine's a big thing for us. So it gives people an opportunity to say, wow, okay, I didn't realise that you can get excellent cuisine on board a cruise ship.
Caroline, these themes that we've been talking about, particularly sustainability, that came up in your presentation as well. When did that start to become a preoccupation for British travellers?
Well, I think there's just been you mentioned this yourself, there's this winds of change, and it feels like we're living through something different. We saw that last year with the ban against plastics, the war against plastics. If you think about school children, they're being educated about the Sustainable Development Goals. This is all sort of natural to them. So when you have a person like Greta Thunberg, who's so iconic in terms of, she's only 16, she's got a climate strike, kids around the world can join that climate strike, you can feel that attitudes are changing. So and also the more emerging a market is, the more exposed they are to the impacts of climate change. So it feels that, yes, the UK consumer has been aware for many years. We're all familiar with recycling, and travel industry has been at the forefront of sustainability for many decades, particularly when you think about the work that Fiona Jeffrey did with WTM and the Sustainability Day here. And now we've got the official SDGs to 2030. It just feels like it's that kind of time where these attitudes are changing and shaping how consumers want to travel. And as Neil said, basically if you give people a greener alternative, or Ryanair helping people offset their flights, that will appease and make people feel less guilt about travelling, which is what we're seeing, this rise of flight shaming, people feeling guilty about travelling, the impact if they go on long haul, should they be taking the train rather than a flight. KLM even advertising, don't fly to Paris or whatever, take the Eurostar, or take an alternative mode of transport. It's about working together. It's not a lost visitor or trip. It's just maybe that opportunity wasn't at the right time, and they'll come back when it's maybe a long haul to Shanghai instead.
And I think the other thread to all this is sort of sense of mindful travel, the idea that when you travel, you don't want to cause harm, that you want to come back different, you want to feel as though you're creatively changed by any journey you take. It has also ramifications to do with diversity, isn't it? Joe, there's something that matters hugely to you. Mm-hmm. Do you think the industry is doing enough, and do you think in the next few years things will be ramped up in that sort of particular environment?
I think the industry overall has got a long way to go. EasyJet's got a very strong programme on gender equality, as have we. And again, like anything, it's about measuring it and really setting targets. And we've gone from 3% to 22% female officers on the bridge since 2015. And that has been done through an awful lot of hard work and diligent processing and working through how we actually make that change in how we look at hiring cadets and how we actually giving confidence that young girls can actually drive ships as well as be cruise directors on board the ships. We've now got 4 female captains within the fleet of 13, which we're rejoicing about, but it's only 4. So I think and it really takes, as like everything in life, it takes individuals to make a change. Greta's making a significant impact now, and our president and CEO has absolutely made a drive on this, which is now permeated throughout the organisation for All Caribbean Group. And within that, we have always been a very inclusive organisation, but it's one thing saying it and another thing doing it. And I think the other thing is that diversity of any form, a mixed group, a mixed team is always the best team, because our customers are mixed, and our customers are from all over the world and from different backgrounds. And I think overall the UK travel industry has an awful long way to go. I think as an industry, there still is a lack of diversity, as we saw earlier by anybody who was at the lunch, by the awful joke that was told by the professor, which was just quite gobsmacking for those of us in the industry who were in the room. In 2019, for somebody to believe that it's appropriate to start a conference with such a sexist joke. So, and unfortunately, I just don't think there's enough people who are standing up and being counted. And I'm very fortunate that I work for an organisation from the chairman down that gives people that voice, and we have a very strong campaign called Free to Be Me. We have employee resource groups around the world linked to LGBTQ, women in business, young professionals, accessibility and wellness, and they're very, very active groups, and they change the way in which we look after our guests and our customers, and also our staff. And they're doing some incredible things. So I'm proud of that, but as an industry, especially in the UK, I think we've got an awful long way to go.
Neil, EasyJet, we spoke last year, I think, about your programme to increase the number of female pilots. Is that something that's still being focused on, or are you just allowing it to gently progress?
No, it's very much focused. Diversity and inclusion is incredibly important to EasyJet. We've really focused on the number of female pilots in our workforce. We've taken a look at the industry, and we have seen a number of years ago, we saw that there are only 5% of total pilots in the world are female. Until relatively recently, you could fit all female pilots in the world into an A380 aircraft. I think that's a terrible indictment of the industry, and EasyJet is absolutely committed to doing its part in introducing more diversity into the industry. So we're working with schools, we're working with young cadets, we're really taking steps to make flying an attractive career for young girls as well as young men that are joining the industry. We've set ourselves the target of 20% of our new cadets joining EasyJet by 2020 will be female, and I'm really glad that we're absolutely on track to hit that target. We feel we're doing more than probably anybody else in the aviation industry to really change the diversity and inclusion profile of our sector.
I'd agree with that.
Can I just pick up on one of the areas that the sector deal picked up on was accessibility, and there was a real challenge from government who thought that the industry wasn't very accessible, and wanting to push more targets there. And actually, what I think was good about the process is industry pushed back and said, I think the issue here is that government don't know what we do, and we had all these great case studies, and everyone said to us, every development we are doing, we are looking at putting in accessible facilities, so the debate has moved on from not just improving what there is, but how does Britain position itself as an accessible destination? The challenge to us is to make sure that we're showing accessibility in what we're promoting overseas. So I think that was, a really good story of how the industry can work together.
Before we ask for some questions from the floor, I do feel we should just sort of wrap up our very brief conversation on Brexit. Caroline, assuming that things are resolved at the end of January, and I know that's a big assumption, is the indicators that you seem to be giving in your presentation are that after a sense of change or shock, or however we're going to characterise it, things will be progressing back in a positive fashion over the following few years. Do you think that really we're going to be able to leave behind this moment so easily?
That's a really good question. I think what we've seen from today's panel is a sense of cautious optimism, and this industry is highly resilient and has sort of, if you think back to 10 years ago when we had the global economic crisis and how the industry suffered a shock and, a global shock, which was also felt in terms of declines in inbound demand. And, we're kind of seeing that sort of decline again, but we have to, hope that things will resolve once we have clarity. And the most important thing is to plan. So plan for these contingencies and to find, how do we offer value to our consumers? What are they really looking for? How do we deliver on experiential sustainability, digital? Because ultimately, it's that combination that consumers are looking for. So increasingly having that sort of one-to-one relationship with consumer is so important.
Julia, would you see that as part of the sort of narrative that we've always had, that the British traveller will do anything to go on holiday every year, be the last thing they leave behind? They'll do without food, they don't care about the Marmite, they just want to go on holiday once a year?
I think there is a bit of that now. I think certainly, when employment's good, when you've got good employment records, then that, providing you're in a job, then we do see that, because actually you can diversify your travel. There was so much choice out there. You don't have to take a 2-week celebrity cruise this year, maybe do it next year. So, and I think we're seeing that from all the different demographics that we're working with, where, those customers that have got money, they're still travelling. They may even just put their plans on hold, but they're still going to travel. I've not really come across any of our data. I've not spoken to certainly any of our members where customers are saying, actually, I am just not travelling because of Brexit. They will change their plans. They will look at maybe alternatives, postpone slightly, put the decision off, but there's no data that we've seen, or certainly that we carry out, that demonstrates consumers buying habits are completely changing, where a holiday is not on the cards. It's not a luxury, it's part of your annual routine, so I am going to take it. We live on an island, but the weather most of the time is awful, so we want to get off, and actually, by and large, we've got our nearest allies, but even going afar, we get guaranteed the weather. It is more affordable, at times to travel abroad than it is to stay at home. So it's still good value for money. So I think it will take a lot for the consumer to, providing there's job security. We've not really seen consumers' habits change drastically, where we are concerned that the sales are going to fall off a cliff. Yeah.
Patricia, the weather's awful. Everyone needs to get away. Respond.
We're an island race. Of course, people are always going to want to travel, and I think it's wrong to think that if outbound travels, domestic suffers, and vice versa. Actually, if people got money and they've got confidence, they'll do both, and that's the sweet spot that I think we all want to talk up the travel industry and say, yeah, of course, at times you're going to go abroad, but sometimes you're going to come home. And our challenge actually for domestic is to get the younger audience, the millennials, who are much too used to getting on a flight and going overseas, and to really build that habit of holidaying at home. So our campaign for them is around, giving back and experiences and much more social involvement, to really hammer home the message that you can have experiences in Britain that you will never get anywhere else.
Wonderful. Now I'm going to turn to a few questions that have come in from the audience. This is from Anonymous. Question for Neil. For outbound tourism, how do city breaks currently compare to sunny resort-based holidays?
So, thank you for your question, first of all. A significant portion of EasyJet's business is to destinations around the Mediterranean, and when you look at our kind of capacity profile, you can't underestimate how important that sort of traditional bucket and spade beach destination is for us. Having said that, we have built a significant position across a large number of EasyJet's major cities. We continue to see strong demand for those cities. I think that the benefit that we have as a carrier, as opposed to maybe some airlines that are more UK-centric, is that we have a very significant profile at destination as well. So we're the second largest airline in France, for example, we're the second largest airline at Amsterdam Schiphol. We have a significant presence across Germany and Italy. So when consumers in those markets look to travel, then EasyJet is a natural choice for them. So that helps us significantly. And we haven't really seen any deterioration in demand for travel to those cities, and it may well be that any weakness in the outbound market from the UK is being offset by demand for inbound because of changes in the exchange rates, or maybe it's vice versa. But we are still seeing a relatively buoyant market for all of our city breaks, as well as our traditional sort of beach and leisure destinations.
We have another excellent question. I think it was a bit of politics for Caroline, from Ed Lamb at China Travel Outbound. Does Euromonitor expect a slowing in inbound growth for the US if Trump wins a second term, or does extreme politics have no impact? Might Boris damage the UK?
Without getting political, we have our travel forecast model, which is developed by our analytics team, who are economists, and we feed in the industry data, such as the tourism flows. So we do actually have a scenario called Trump adverse policies. So even worse than we currently have, if you maximise the impact of those, extreme protectionism, the trade war really escalating with China, with Mexico, with Europe. In that case, actually the impact on inbound to the US would be predicted to fall by about 10%. So you're talking about over 10 million trips less on the inbound side. So we already know that the US is seeing a little bit of a slowdown. That's very much because of less Chinese traveling. Equally, the most important, less Mexicans traveling over to the States because of the rise in the tensions, particularly what's happening with the border wall and stronger immigration policies. So without a doubt, travel and tourism is interlinked with the geopolitics of the world, and obviously be delighted to go in more details. Let's leave Boris for now. He can be the elephant in the room.
He's been called many things. That would be awful news for you, Patricia, if there was a huge slowdown from the States.
Yes, but it's about a slow inbound to the States rather than.
Well, I think both ways.
We're
not talking about American
inbound to the US.
Oh, were you? Sorry, my apologies.
Yes. So good news for us.
Good news for us.
Yes.
They'll be doing lovely. I think a couple of people are taking issue with the notion that travelling on flights can be in any way good for the planet. We've got Tom Power. What are EasyJet doing in concrete terms to counter the accusation that an airline profits from damaging the planet? And then there's Ellis Kane Jones. I'm afraid I don't know what these acronyms mean. CASK and RASK are key metrics. Does EasyJet have an emission metric?
Yeah. So, look, we're very clear that we respect the fact that people have a choice whether they're going to fly or not. Some people will choose not to fly, and that's absolutely fine. Those that do choose to fly, what we say is we present them with an option which is more sustainable than most other airlines that are operating out there, because we fly with a much younger fleet, which is much more efficient. We fly with much higher load factors, so the total emission per passenger is far less. And the flying profiles we take, the way we operate our aircraft, means that our environmental impact is less. So, hopefully that's clear in terms of our position. We don't, as far as I'm aware, publish emissions per passenger. I might be wrong, but if we do publish one, I don't have it off the top of my head. But I think we're very clear that when you stack EasyJet up against other airlines operating across Europe and worldwide, and KLM is actually a very interesting example, because KLM have come out and said, well, don't fly. But actually, when you look at EasyJet's aircraft and the choice of flying with EasyJet, that is much more sustainable than flying with KLM, which has much older aircraft, which operates long haul, and when they do fly, their aircraft tend to be less full, so it's less efficient.
This is a fascinating question. I think, again, anonymous, I'm afraid. I suspect directed at Patricia. How do we make sure secondary cities in the UK are still attracting visitors and revenue versus London?
Yes, it's one of our challenges internationally that half of our international visitors don't go outside London. And so our remit is to grow tourism in other cities and across the nations and regions of Britain. We do that by promoting those in our campaigns. We've had some money from government to build product, which has broadly been outside London, so that we can promote England internationally more successfully. But I agree with you that it is a challenge in the sort of rebalancing of the economy, and it will continue to be a focus of ours.
I think we've got maybe time for one more, and then we'll have to wrap up. Why to the whole panel, do we think that the return of Turkey to the market impacts only Greece and not the rest of the Med, like Italy and Spain? I mean, I think we've probably better start with you, Caroline.
Yeah, I wasn't.
You're just being mean about Greece earlier, weren't you?
I wasn't. It's not just Greece, but it was in terms of looking at the overall impact, and Greece seemed to be the most impacted. But yeah, that's from the travel forecast model that we have. But I think we should be celebrating the fact that these destinations are back and have rebounded, particularly Egypt, which has been off the table for 4 or 5 years since the downing of the Russian airliner. Now we can see that they're partnering with the likes of Saudi Arabia, they're working with TripAdvisor, they've really sort of upped their game in terms of getting their message back out there. Although I think there was some notes in Travel Weekly that we need to have something specific about Sharm el Sheikh, but that seems to be coming in the new year, that there'll be a new promotional campaign.
Just as a sort of final wrap-up, could each of you give me a sense of the, in a few words, about the things we should be thinking about in 2020? What would those words be, Patricia?
Oh, come to me first.
Nearest.
I think growth in value, not just the fixation on numbers. I think delivering the sector deal, getting better data on customers, and getting that going right down to the SMEs, who are sort of the bedrock of the British industry, and people. So, every industry we talk about the quality of the people in tourism is hugely important. So how do we get good people in? How do we retain them? And then sustainability is the one that we need to be showing a lot more of next year.
You've stolen all of them there, haven't you?
Yes.
Julie?
I've got some different ones.
Go on.
So not to repeat anything Patricia said, I think, customer service, I think focus on the consumer and focus on delivering a service that, you expect to be delivered. Because I think sometimes that in an economy, we're in a marketplace where it's so driven back to technology and process, actually put the customer back at the forefront of your transaction. And I think consumer confidence, I think building confidence, giving the consumer every confidence that the travel industry is there to support it, and it's fun, it's exciting, whether it's UK, overseas. It's a great industry to be in.
Neil?
Yeah. So I mean, we haven't even talked about data and digital. That's a key priority for us at EasyJet. We are very excited with a number of developments that we're making in that space, and we see room for further developments in that area in 2020, in particular in terms of improving our operational efficiency. And actually, I'd major on the efficiency point. We're going into an environment with a lot of headwinds. There is going to be competitive pressures. We've seen very recently the requirement for airlines and other operators in the industry to be resilient to economic pressures. I think the focus for us going into 2020 will be on making sure that our business is as well managed, as productive, as efficient, and can offer really great value for our customers as it possibly can.
Joe?
I mean, travel is good, not bad. Travel opens up the world, broadens our horizons. Yes, it's important that we continue to invest, as I said, from our point of view, in those three key areas of leaving the destination better than when we arrived: our people and our customers and technology. And we always need to look at what we can do from a continuous improvement, without a doubt. But as an industry, let's really not lose. Imagine if we become incredibly insular. and we all stop meeting one another, visiting one another, understanding each other's cultures. There's enough of that going on already. Let's not become more insular. Let's become more diverse and more open.
Caroline,
let's be proud of what we do as an industry.
Yeah, quite.
I definitely echo that. Inclusive, social, for example, EasyJet's Look and Book, that you can book travel directly from an Instagram photo. Social commerce, that's an area that we hopefully will begin to see a bit more of next year. So the whole digital transformation of travel is, we can't underestimate that. We have to keep on that journey. Otherwise, we see the impact if we don't, such as Thomas Cook. So I would wholeheartedly suggest continuing on that sustainable digital experiential journey.
Brilliant. Well, look, it's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you all for listening. Do join me in thanking Julia Lowe-Bouet-Said, Joe Jamoska, Neil Slavin, Patricia Yates, and of course Caroline Bremner. Thank you.